owe a debt of gratitude to Warren Redlich for being very patient all day long, and we've had a lot of sessions, and he's sat there biding his time. But I deliberately wanted to save this session to the last. So for better or worse, I was the one who put the agenda together, and I spent a lot of time juggling who was going to go first and where were they going to go, and then Sandy's flight changed and we ended up moving everything around. But I wanted to finish on an up, right? Because we all know that life with Tesla can be challenging sometimes. And certainly in my 10 years, I've had the odd challenge. But I am very optimistic. And for those of you that don't know Warren, his kind of moniker is that he is a Hyperbull. One of the most optimistic people about the future of Tesla around. And I share those views. So I was keen that we finish on an up and that we have a chat with Warren about what the future might look like. And so with that, Mr. Warren Redlich. Thank you. I have to start with.
There's a lot goes on. I think a lot of us tend to obsess. You had mentioned the Q3 earnings call, and we get caught up in what's going to happen in the short term with Tesla stock, and I got myself caught up in that, which is something I didn't usually do, and I'm going back to my long-term thinking. And so these are simple models for Tesla growth. And if we can go to the first slide, and I actually updated this one a little bit. If you think about Tesla selling, so let's say a Tesla Model 3, and if you imagine a hypothetical Model 3, let's say it's a $30,000 Model 3, I know there's no $30,000 Model 3, and let's say it has a 50 kilowatt hour battery pack. You would get $600 a kilowatt hour. It's really like $45,000 or $48,000 for the cheapest Model 3. It's really a 60 kilowatt hour pack, and you might get $800 a kilowatt hour. But think about Tesla selling products where the average product priced by battery content works out to about $500 a kilowatt hour. And then move forward and say, well, Tesla said we're going to produce 3 terawatt hours worth of products in 2030. Right? We just heard on the earnings call they're going to do 1 terawatt hour in the United States. What they didn't say, or 1,000 gigawatt hours. What they didn't say was they're also going to do 1,000 gigawatt hours in Asia and 1,000 gigawatt hours in Europe, or around the world, a total of 3 terawatt hours. That's what they said at Battery Day. So if you've got $500 a kilowatt hour, then you've got $500,000 a megawatt hour. Then you've got $500 million a gigawatt hour, and you've got $500 billion a terawatt hour, which means you got $1.5 trillion of revenue in 2030. We had about $80 billion in revenue in the last 4 quarters. I think it's less than $80 billion in revenue in the last 4 quarters. So that, you might say that's a lot of growth. And people can pick this apart, and people can say, well, the price won't be the same in 2030. It might be less per kilowatt hour. Well, like I said, right now, a Model 3 Standard Range Plus is about $47,000 and has about a 60 kilowatt hour pack, and that's about $800 a kilowatt hour. So I'm being conservative when I say $500. And I should say a mega pack, list price for a mega pack is about $2.2 million if you're buying one of them. It's 4 megawatt hours, which works. And if you take $2 million for 4 megawatt hours, you get $500 a kilowatt hour. So and it depends on the product. You know, I drive a Model X Plaid. So that's currently not what I paid for it. It was about $150,000 for 100 kilowatt hour packs. That's $1,500 a kilowatt hour. So it varies by product. And then you can get into like power walls, and you can get into, well, if the power walls are sold with solar, you get significantly more than $500 a kilowatt hour. It's actually pretty hard to get a number below $500 a kilowatt hour average across the company now, or even if you go out into the future and you try to project it out. This is pretty reasonable, and so now you get to $1.5 trillion in revenue in 2030. This, by the way, is my conservative model. This isn't the optimistic model. The more exciting ones are coming. And you figure, all right, $1.5 trillion, what's the, what would that company be worth? A company that's selling $1.5 trillion of products. And keep in mind, Tesla has, let's say, 20% margin. So then what are you talking about? You're talking about $300 billion a year in profit. Price earnings ratio of 20. You've got a $6 trillion company. Right now it's a $600 or $700 billion company. So you're talking about a 10x roughly. And if you get a little more optimistic within this model, you can easily get the stock to go up 20x from where it is today in 8 years, right? All you have to do is say, now there's a question here. Do you believe that Tesla can get to 3 terawatt hours by 2030? And if it's 2031 or 2032, do you really care? But that's a fairly optimistic projection for where Tesla, the company, is going.
That's your bear case.
Yeah, that's pretty much the bear case, because that model is like, that's current, right? That's not, what happens when 100% of the vehicles are sold with FSD at $50,000 a car, right? Which is not a model I'm going to use here today. But if FSD becomes so good that people really want it, right? And people are willing, because right now it's $15,000. Right now it's about 10% take rate in the United States and very low in other places. What if the take rate goes to 50%? What if the price goes to $25,000? I'm not even accounting for that. What if, you can do a million what if scenarios. What if the competition is coming? I'm really waiting for the competition to be coming. I just saw, the Polestar 3 came out, and it's like $85,000 for something that's nowhere near as good as a Model Y that costs like $60,000. The competition is comical. That's just my take on it. I'm waiting for that actually, and I think in energy storage, in theory, there might be decent competition. The other thing to recognize is the total addressable market, the amount that's needed, is so big. 3 terawatt hours, the world is going to need 300 to 400 terawatt hours to transition to sustainable energy. So this is a minor dent. There's plenty of room for other competitors to come in. That's the same thing with cars. They're on pace for selling about 2 million cars a year globally. The global auto sales is around 70 million vehicles a year, so Tesla's barely making a dent. Whenever people say there's electric vehicle competition coming, they're not competing with Tesla. If you make an EV that's not better than Tesla, but it's better than gas cars, you'll sell all your EVs and you won't affect Tesla sales at all. The competitions, instead of thinking of Tesla competing with Rivian, competing with the Ford F-150 Lightning, competing with Lucid, whatever, all the EV companies are competing together to get rid of ICE vehicles. So whenever you hear that, I get criticisms in a lot of ways, but I want to turn to the second model. Can we go to the next slide? This is maybe simpler. I'm going to start with the background for these numbers. Elon on Autonomy Day said that he anticipated Tesla would have its own fleet of 10 million robo-taxis at some point in the future. I think ballpark 2030 that Tesla would have its own fleet of 10 million robo-taxis that it would operate itself, in addition to some of us taking our vehicles, pressing the go, we have the Tesla app on our phones, we press the go making money button. What's that? Okay, is that better?
Move your hand up the microphone.
Hand up the microphone.
Block the bottom.
Oh, okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so think about, is that better? Okay. One of the scenarios that we're anticipating is that we're going to get the Tesla app, we're going to have our Tesla car. I have my Model 3 from 2018, I have FSD beta on that car, and they're going to say, okay, the robo-taxi fleet is alive, and your Tesla app is going to have a new button that says, go make me money. And you're going to send your car out to go make you money, and Tesla's going to get a share of that revenue. But I'm not even including that in this story. This is Tesla, in addition to whatever we do, Tesla deploys its own fleet of 10 million robo-taxis. Typical robo-taxi that's operating 16 hours a day from 6 a.m. to midnight is a rough estimate. We'll do about 100,000 miles a year. These numbers are really conservative. I've talked to Uber drivers who make over $100,000 a year. So the numbers I'm about to give you are fairly conservative, right? Because that number there, $45,000, is the profit that the vehicle's making. And I know some Uber drivers make over $100,000 a year. So I think I'm being fairly conservative here. But if you figure the vehicle drives 100,000 miles in a year, 60,000 of those miles are occupied, paid miles, okay? The cost of the vehicle to the owner, in this case Tesla, is gonna be about 15 cents a mile. And the profit story from that, if it's $1 a mile, right? If it's selling the rides for $1 a mile, currently Uber and Lyft are about $2.50 or $3 a mile. So if you get to the point where your supply is big enough that you're cutting that demand, the price has to come down, maybe you get to 60 cents a mile, you generate $60,000 of revenue in the year on that 100,000 miles, the 60,000 are paid, and you spent $15,000 because you had 100,000 miles that you had to account for. you end up with $45,000 in gross profit on 10 million vehicles. Okay, that's $450 billion in profit for Tesla on 10, with leaving out everything else, right? That doesn't include what they might make selling cars. That doesn't include what they might make on Tesla Energy. That doesn't include what they might make in AI training supercomputers. Just on a 10 million vehicle robot. That doesn't include us hitting the Go Make Me button and Tesla getting a piece of our revenue from our vehicles operating as robotaxis. $450 billion a year in gross profit from a 10 million vehicle fleet, and that's very easy for Tesla. Assuming they're able to make robotaxi work, which I think is a no-brainer that will happen well before 2030. 450 billion in gross profit. Tesla's revenue in the last 12 months was less than 80 billion. So you just do some math and you say, okay, what price earnings ratio am I giving that? And then you take another step and you say, well, what's the market? What's the total market potential for robotaxis? Globally, there are 2 billion vehicles in the world. If you listen to the Q3 earnings call, Elon mentioned that. If they make 20 million vehicles a year, they're contributing 1% of the global fleet. So you eventually replace the global fleet in 100 years, which is way less than we want to do. If you figure a robotaxi replaces 5 cars, right, because it drives more than a regular car, then 100 million vehicles would replace 500 million vehicles in the global fleet. And we still don't have enough vehicles to replace the global fleet. But let's say that reduces the price because you've saturated the market so much, you've reduced the price. Now you've got $20,000 of profit instead of $45,000 profit per car, but you've got 100 million cars, and now you've got $2 trillion in gross profit. I realize people can pick apart these numbers, but I don't think this is crazy numbers. It sounds crazy when you get to the end and you say, wait a minute, $2 trillion in gross profit, let's say that's $1.5 trillion in net profit or $1.54 trillion in net profit, and I give it a price earnings ratio of 20, that's like $30 trillion in market cap on a company that's currently trading for $600 or $700 million. That's like a 30x. Is that a 50x? That might be a 50x. It's a very, very large, so you're sitting here and you're upset that your stock is trading at $210 a share. You're thinking, well, it might be $10,000 a share in 5 years. And this is why when you hear all the negatives about Tesla and the Wall Street analysts and everything, they are not pricing anything like this in at all. They're not looking at 2030 and saying 3 terawatt. It's like they can't hear Jimmy. They can't, I don't know if anybody gets that reference from the movie White Men Can't Jump, but when Elon says we're gonna have 3 terawatt hours of batteries in 2030, they can't conceive of that. When Elon says we're gonna have a 10 million vehicle robotaxi fleet, they don't analyze that far out. Some of the, like Kathy Wood analyzes that far out. I think, is it Dan Ives or Pierre Ferragu? There's a couple of the Wall Street analysts who follow Tesla who do start to get it and do talk about it a little bit. But, I think a lot of people in the room drive FSD beta. We can all agree it's not there yet. Do we think it's 8 years away? I think it's less than 8 years away. I think it's end of next year, end of 2024, something like that. We're going to see. And I just want to address that. There was a question earlier. I think it was John Gibbs and Chuck Cook were talking about whether there will be a Tesla robotaxi network operating somewhere in some city in the United States. There are robotaxi fleets operating in Chandler, Arizona, and San Francisco, California by Waymo and Cruise. All they have to do is meet the standard of these other, frankly, crappy fleets. I've ridden in Waymo in Chandler, Arizona. I was not impressed. I don't think it's a really, really high bar to be better than Waymo. And I don't know if anybody's ridden in a Waymo. I've ridden in a Waymo, not impressive. So my friend Omar, you guys know Omar Kazi, Omar's blog? He was driving along with us in a Model 3 on FSD beta. We were going to a church. We just randomly picked this destination. The Waymo stopped in the middle of the street to let us out. FSD beta pulled into the parking lot. I'm just saying, I did not think that was a safe place for Waymo to stop, and they're allowed to operate that. So I don't think it's going to be hard for Tesla to get better than that. So I just wanted to present to you, that's another model of where, there's one other thing that John and Chuck were talking about. There was one other thing that John and Chuck were talking about was like local regulation interfering with the operation of a robotaxi fleet. We are in the state of Florida. I don't agree with everything our government does, but our government, I think it was 2019, passed a new law. Under that new law, local governments are self-driving cars and robotaxi networks are legal. Local governments are prohibited from taxing or regulating self-driving cars and robo-taxi networks. In the state of Florida, I believe other states have followed that model. So the idea that, I genuinely am concerned that I think government is the greatest threat not only to Tesla but to the rest of us. And I genuinely am concerned that there will be ways that government will find to mess up what should be a great future. But in the state of Florida, that's not going to be a problem, and I think several other states have adopted similar legislation. So we can go to the next slide. Elon's been talking about Tesla Bot, and I think a lot of people, the reason I have a YouTube channel is I saw something that happened, it was actually related to SpaceX, and I watched Everyday Astronaut, I watched Scott Manley, I watched Marcus House, and nobody was talking about it. It was about a future 18-meter diameter Starship. And nobody was talking about it, and I couldn't shut myself up, so I made a video, and people watch that, I'll make more videos. And I feel like I'm offering a different perspective. So the perspective I take on Bot is because I used to work in a Burger King and a Dairy Queen when I was younger. So if you can imagine a hypothetical workplace, and we'll call it a fast food restaurant because that's what I can relate to, and imagine, and this isn't really true anymore, but imagine that there's 10 workers on a shift at your local McDonald's. Maybe it's a big McDonald's, because usually they have fewer staff than that now. It's not that Bot replaces a worker. It's that if you can train a bot to do the worst tasks, taking out the garbage, mopping the floors, it's not assembling the burger yet, right? Which is a relatively complex task. If you can find simple tasks that the bot can do, that a combination of workers were doing before, and enables you to reduce your staff from 10 to 9, right? And that one worker, and I'm just gonna make up a random number, you think they're making $15 an hour, because there's places where the workers get paid more than that. I think there's even places in California where they get paid $25 an hour, but I'll just use a random number and say, the worker costs the employer $20 an hour. Not just their pay, but the benefits, the vacation time, when you add it all together, the worker costs the employer $20 an hour. And Bot works 2 shifts, because it doesn't need a break, right? The bot works 2 shifts. So the bot works 4,000 hours a year, saving the employer 1 employee on each shift, right? The bot is saving the employer $80,000 a year. And the bot probably lasts 10 years. I think these are reasonable projections about not the bot we saw at the presentation at AI Day, but where they will get to with bot is something that can do simple tasks, should be able to do this work and save the employer $80,000 a year on 1 employee. They reduce from 10 to 9. And I know everybody's crying about all the jobs that are lost at McDonald's. We really want people to be able to have successful careers at McDonald's. We can talk about that later. But what does it cost to build a bot? And I have $5,000 up here. A Tesla Model 3 weighs about 3,500 pounds. I think I'm in the ballpark. A bot's gonna weigh about 125 pounds. That would, that's like 1/30th of the size, 1/30th of the mass. If you can get your manufacturing reasonably decent, I'm not suggesting the bot will be 1/30th the cost, and I'm talking about the cost for Tesla to produce, not the cost, the price that they sell it for. It probably cost Tesla about $30,000 to make a Model 3, maybe 35. If it's the mass is 1/30th. So if the cost to Tesla is 1/7, you get to $5,000. Maybe it's $7,000, maybe it's $10,000. If it's generating $80,000 a year of work, and it only costs $10,000 to make, what is Burger King or McDonald's going to be willing to pay for a bot that saves it $80,000 a year? So I'll make up a number and say, so my gut is, over 10 years, that bot is going to do ballpark $500,000 worth of work, and it only costs $5,000 to make. That's, incredible value. And what's the potential for a bot? It's over time, I'm talking about the simplest labor in the short run, right? The simplest labor in the short run is taking out the garbage, cleaning the floors, doing really simple stuff. Over time, it'll be trained to do more stuff. A really good example of I think John and Chuck were talking about, what are bot applications? And what people think of, what we tend to do is, well, how am I going to use that, right? And I don't think that's the short-term application of bot is in the home. It's a nice potential application down the road that people will buy a bot and the bot will do work for them. But I think the workplace is the natural thing. I think roofing, you have dangerous, what did he say? Dangerous, repetitive, and boring. How about installing roofing tiles? Or solar roof tiles, or solar panels on roofs? There's not much more dangerous than being at 30 feet off the ground. If you can have bots, replace some of the workers and keep them safer, by doing the most dangerous work on a roof. And that's higher value labor than McDonald's or Burger King, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can see it coming into play. And you just go down the road and you say, well, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and a large share of us are doing crappy work that's simple and not highly paid and dangerous, repetitive, and boring work. There's easily 100 million jobs like that, not counting that we're going to need a heck of a lot of them on Mars and on the moon. So if you figure that they're going to do $500,000 of work and there's 100 million of them, you can see that that value is really, really high. I mean, if you say, all right, they generate $50,000 a year in profit for Tesla, times 10 million bots a year, you can just see where, okay, all of a sudden that's like $5 trillion a year in profit. You can play with the numbers and get to numbers like $5 trillion in value, and that's why I'm called a hyper. I didn't make up the term hyperbull. Somebody else made up that term. I just think I'm looking at it from very, very simple. I don't do like complex spreadsheets like James Stevenson. I love James Stevenson. He does these really complex spreadsheets. Even Rob Maurer does some fairly complicated spreadsheets. I just do what I think I would call napkin math and say, look, this is pretty straightforward. Show me what I'm getting wrong. And so far, I don't get a lot of pushback like, well, I don't really know that there's that much work for bot. Well, right now I agree. Oh, sorry, the really simple job that I think bot could do is you've got a secure facility you want protected. And right now you've got, I'm making up the number, 10 security guards walking the perimeter. It's like a big facility. All of a sudden you can have 5 security guards and you can have 10 bots walking the perimeter. And it's like actually there's a point I want to get to with the bot. And I was really surprised about this at AI Day. I thought, okay, FSD is used to take the wheeled bots, the 4-wheel robots we all drive, and navigate space, but they don't manipulate objects. Our cars hopefully do not manipulate objects. Our cars just see where the objects are and drive through them without hitting them. And I did not think they were going to get to the point that bot would be able to manipulate objects. But we know that the cars are pretty good at navigating space, so I expect that bot, especially since it's going much lower speed, will be able to navigate space. And more complicated spaces, it's got to learn different spaces, but that I thought was what they were going to show off, and I was really stunned. I'm actually puzzled, did they use the FSD chip to manipulate objects, or was something else on the bot manipulating objects? That's a question we'll find out maybe at the next AI Day. But this security job I'm describing, there's no manipulation of objects. They don't have to interact. If they see something, the bots are walking around the property. If they see something that appears to be out of place, then they contact the chief of security and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, right? And if chief of security says, okay, there's something there, then they say, now you can do this with fixed cameras, but it may be that having bots walk around are able to see something that fixed cameras wouldn't see. So that's just one idea. I think there's many ideas for the way bots can do work, and the number of jobs that are dangerous, repetitive, and boring, or at least 1 or 2 of those. There's a lot of them out there. Some of you have probably had similar jobs. I can assure you that flipping burgers at Burger King is at least repetitive and boring, and one time I did get grease in my eyes and had to go to a doctor. I don't call that dangerous, but I'm okay. I know you're all worried. I'm fine. So, just talking really quick about Q3. A couple of highlights. I think you probably all caught it, but there was a reference to the next generation vehicle. This contributes to that robo-taxi model from before. The next generation vehicle, they said, was going to be roughly half the cost of manufacturing of a Model 3 and smaller than a Model 3. So at Autonomy Day, Elon was talking about a Model 3 cost about 18 cents a mile, right? So if you can get it down to, I think there's a question, and Elon said it at another point that the robo-taxi platform vehicle, whatever, their focus was getting the cost per mile down. Because if you can lower the cost per mile, then you can generate more profit off the vehicle operating as a robo-taxi. So I think we're going to see, it's really going to be an interesting question. How small are they going? I think that's a really valuable thing for some markets, not the United States, where I've been told, for example, Japan, I believe there's going to be a Giga Osaka, that's a whole other conversation, but I've been told by people, well, Tesla's cars are too big for the Japanese market. I don't think that's really true, but there are definitely a lot of smaller cars in Japan. I lived in Japan for a year. So if the vehicle is smaller, maybe that's a big entry to the Japanese market, which is the 3rd largest car market in the world after China and the United States. Fourth if you count Europe as a single market. So then, if you can get that vehicle, there's that question, how much is the cost per mile of operating that vehicle? Maybe they get that down to 10 cents a mile. If they get that vehicle down to 10 cents a mile, then all of a sudden, that $45,000 number I gave you for gross profit becomes $50,000, right? Because you're getting $60,000 in revenue minus $10,000 a year in cost. So I think that's why the goal is, and then over the long haul, at first it's a dollar. I think initially robotaxi world, they're going to undercut Uber and Lyft. So if Uber and Lyft are at $3 a mile, they're going to be $2.50 a mile or $2 a mile. But as they saturate the market, that comes down. And I don't remember who was talking. Somebody else was talking. I wanted to say one thing related to this. A lot of us are convinced that the future is us owning cars. And I think that's because most of us are probably wealthy enough that we don't find it that much of a burden to own a car. If you look toward the future and you take people who are not as well off as we are, owning a car can be a burden. There's not only the cost, but there's the time that you have to buy a car, you have to sell a car, you have to get new tires. We just had a presentation on tires. You have to replace your tires every 20,000 miles. That's a cost and it's a hassle because now you've got to spend time getting that done. You got to replace your windshield wipers. You've got to, get your car washed. You've got to charge your car, not charge your car. In a robotaxi world where you're just riding, you decide, I'm not going to own a car, I'm just going to ride. You just pull out your phone, say, I need a ride, and today I need just a ride for me. Next week I need a ride for my kids. Send me a car send me a robotaxi with a child seat. Next week I got 6 of us. Send us a big one. You can choose what ride you need in an app, and you step out. You hit it on your phone as you're walking out the door, and a vehicle pulls up within minutes. You hop in, it drops you off at the front door, it picks you up at the front door. You don't have to worry about where you're parked. You never get into a hot car. You never get into a cold car. You never have to scrape ice off a windshield. A lot of things. We're in Florida, so we don't scrape ice off a lot of windshields. I haven't done it in 11 years. I'm hoping to keep that going. But we internalize a lot of these costs, either price and time costs that we have in owning a car. I think we're heading towards a world where most people don't own cars. A far smaller share of the population owns cars, and they choose to live a robo-taxi life where they don't even own a car. So the idea that Tesla is focused on making cars to sell to individual customers, I think misses where we're going. If the goal is to be able to transport people from point A to point B, and they don't really care what their vehicle, like you're going to get an Uber. Do you care whether they pick you up in an SUV? It's just you and you're going from point A to point B. You're coming to an airport, you got a suitcase, and you want to get to your hotel. Do you care if it's an SUV or a sedan or a minivan? You don't care, you just want to ride. I mean, maybe you care a little, but it's not a really high priority for you for most people. And you can probably press the button and say, send me a Model S if you really want to ride in luxury or something like that. But in that world, there is because people think, well, there isn't enough market for 3 million of the 3 million vehicles a year of the same type. Well, if we're dealing with a world of 10 million, 100 million robotaxis, and the vast majority of them are transport one person from point A to point B, then 10 million a year is easy of one model, just a simple model for commuters. So I think I'm rambling too much. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to mention was the battery ramp from Q3. Nick, how am I doing on time? Am I okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things they talked about was the battery ramp. The battery ramp is going well, and I was really excited about this 1,000 gigawatt hours in North America. I think they said 1,000 gigawatt hours in the United States. So I think we're going to see gigafactory announcements fairly soon, somewhere else in the United States besides Texas and California. I would like to say Giga Orlando. I think Giga Orlando is a really good idea. If it happens, you heard it here first. But they mentioned specifically iron cathode batteries. Most of our cars are using nickel-based battery cells. There is an iron-based cathode, lithium iron phosphate battery cells. I think that we're going to see lithium iron phosphate battery cells produced in the United States. It pretty clearly said that. And that's going to be, and then with this, I call it the Inflation Acceleration Act, but you can call it the Inflation Reduction Act. If you look at the tax credits, it's going to be a huge boom for Tesla. Last thing I want to talk about was FSD development. The one thing I don't hear a lot of other people talking about, I just want to present it here, is what's happening with FSD. I think a lot of you drive FSD beta. I have certain complaints. Like, I think it's great. but there's certain things like Chuck Cook, I don't know if Chuck's still here, but the Chuck Cook style left turn, you know, they're getting closer, but that still needs work. If you're ever doing a left turn into a road with a suicide lane instead of Chuck's median, my experience has not been that good with the suicide lane left turns. And not only that, but if you're driving along next to a suicide lane and somebody else makes a left turn into the suicide lane, the car doesn't handle that well. So that's an example of something that they're making progress on, but still needs work. But I really think my own take is mapping and navigation have to improve, and I think that's probably coming. And I just have this theory that when, you know, Elon makes this projection, it's gonna be ready by the end of next year for, you know, operate without someone in it. I think they have a list of these are the things we gotta fix before it's ready that they haven't shared with us. And they're just checking off, okay, this one's 20%, this one's done. They've got a list and they know what they need to do. Like, we don't know what they need to do. This is like if I had a chance to talk, if I got to ask Elon a question, it'd be like, what steps do you need to get to before, it's not just a march of nines, it's like, well, it needs to be able to make a U-turn, right? If you have FSD beta, it won't make a U-turn. It needs to be able to make a U-turn, it probably needs to be able to make a 3-point turn. It would be nice if it would back out of my driveway. It would be nice if it parked itself in a parking spot. There's a bunch of little things that needs to get done. I think some of these things are about to happen. I think he said Actually Smart Summit is coming next release. But my gut is they have a list, and it's not just Elon saying it, Zach Kirkhorn said it a couple of earnings calls ago. It's coming. And that's going to be a big driver. And that's why, I don't know, when he said they were going to be worth more than Apple and Saudi Aramco combined, I was like, no, it's 10 times that value. So that's why I'm a Hyperbull. I'm apparently more bullish than Elon. So thank you for listening. I hope this was interesting. Do you want to see if there are any questions?
Sure. Anybody going to wrap us up with a question? We've got one at the back over there.
Any
Thoughts
thoughts on Lucid?
on Lucid Motors? So if you don't know this, I am the largest, the most vocal critic of Lucid Motors on YouTube, apparently. Lucid's fundamental prop is they're running out of cash. Their fundamental, I'll use Rivian as a comparison. I think that's the easiest way to compare it. Rivian chose a niche that is much larger than Lucid's niche and largely uncompetitive. There's likely no current competitors in the EV space for Rivian's vehicles. The Ford F-150 Lightning is out there or was out there, and that's arguably a competitor, but SUVs and pickups are a really good niche, and they've sort of chosen like an off-road friendly SUV and truck. So I think they've chosen a niche that's much larger than the greater than $100,000 luxury car market. The other problem for Lucid and the other advantage of Rivian is Rivian did an IPO and they have about last I saw they had about $18 billion in cash, not much less than Tesla has. Lucid is down to around $4 billion in cash when they do one of the reasons I'm not fond of Lucid is I find that they're less than transparent and less than honest in their reporting. At a previous earnings call, Peter Rawlinson was asked, what's your current run rate? And he said it would be misleading to answer that question. It would be misleading to provide factual information. Okay, you could give the factual answer and then explain why it's not fairly representative instead of just not answering the question. So if you look at their quarterly statements, they will say cash. Then they'll say cash and cash equivalents. And the latest one they said cash, latest two, they said cash equivalents, and investments. Why don't you report the same thing each quarter? So the problem is they have admitted they're going to run out of cash next year. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but we may be having a financial crisis. We may be having some kind of economic crisis. It might be a tough time to raise money. And it may be that the Saudis, the perception of people who support Lucid is the Saudis will backstop it. Maybe. But, you know, if the Saudis do backstop it, then you're going to have either a huge loans to pay off or you're going to have a dilution because the Saudis own 60%. The Saudi private investment fund, whatever it's called, owns 60% of Lucid Motors. So if the Saudis are going to buy more shares, then the rest of the people who own 40% all of a sudden own a smaller share of a company. And if you look at their SPAC merger documents from February of 2021, I'm not saying I follow this very closely, but I remember the SPAC merger documents from February 2021. They had projected out when they were going to make positive cash flow, when they're going to make EBITDA profit, when they're going to make net profit, and all their projections were like, we're not really going to be making money until 2025, and that was assuming they hit their targets in 2021 and 2022, but they haven't been hitting their targets in 2021 or 22. So they don't become cash flow positive now until maybe 2025 or 2026. So even if they raise capital in 2023, they got to raise enough capital to get them through like 2026. to not die. And now put yourself in the shoes of the Saudis. Do I want to stick $10 billion more into this company that's probably going to go under anyway? That's just a challenge. I don't have the answer to that question. I'm not saying it's not a good car. I have some questions about the car. I'm not as convinced it's as good of a car as people think. I think the battery pack is larger than they're saying. I could be wrong. There's a whole bunch of issues with Lucid, but was that a longer answer than I should have given?
Alrighty. On that note,
Thank you, everyone.
Warren Redlich.